Every one of us is tasked with bringing the world to perfection. This week's Parsha reveals a secret to help us do just that. In Parashah Vayechi, Yaakov is on his deathbed, giving a final message to his children, grandchildren, and future generations. But it's what happens after his death that he wanted to focus on. Yosef gives his father a state funeral, and a grand procession escorts his body back to the land of Israel, to Hebron, and buries him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field that Abraham had bought from Ephron the Hittite after Sarah's death. The Talmud relates a fascinating story about the burial. As Yaakov's body is being escorted from Egypt to Israel, along comes Esav. Esav attempts to block his brother from being buried there, claiming that as the firstborn, it is he who has the right to be buried in their ancestral burial place. In order to prove to Esav that Yaakov purchased the birthright from him, thereby gaining the privilege of burial in the cave, the sons send their fastest brother Naphtali all the way back to Egypt to procure the necessary documents. Meanwhile, one of Yaakov's grandchildren by the name of Chushim, who was hard of hearing, inquired of his brothers as to the unusual delay in the funeral procession. When he was told that Esav was behind it, he immediately took an axe and chopped off his great uncle Esav's head, which then promptly rolled into the double cave to be buried together with Yaakov's body. Why did the brothers send Naphtali back to Egypt to procure the necessary documents? Why didn't they dismiss Esav on the spot? Well, Esav was charismatic and had a way with words. He said that the cave had room for 4 pairs of graves. Adam and Eve had the first pair, Avram and Sarah the second, Yitzchak and Rivka had the third, leaving 2 graves, one for him and one for Yaakov. Yaakov decided to use his allotted grave to bury his wife Leah, leaving the last grave for Esav. It's an absurd position. None of the other graves were used for anything but husband and wife. But Esav had the knack of making absurd positions sound valid, tugging at the brothers' heartstrings about poor Uncle Esav. Chaverim, my friends, we all know people like Esav, smooth talkers who can make the most absurd positions sound reasonable. Sometimes they are salespeople trying to talk you into buying something you know you don't need. Sometimes they're politicians convincing you why their position is actually for your own good. Sometimes they are influencers on social media, smooth-talking people into believing October 7th was justified and Israel has no right to exist. Everywhere I turn on the internet, I encounter more and more Esavs. How was Chushim able to resist Esav's smooth-talking? Chushim was deaf, but he wasn't blind. Because he was deaf, Esav's words had no impact on him, and he was able to rely on what he saw happening in front of him to discern what was true. In a world filled with smooth-talking Esavs, we need to channel our inner Chushim and block out all of the extra noise. Don't fall for the slick-sounding arguments. Don't fall for people who mask their anti-Semitism with noble-sounding words. Stick to what we can see with our own eyes, what we know to be true, and stand up proudly and proclaim that truth. Proclaim it so loud that anyone else falling under Esav's spell can take pause and realize that those salespeople, those politicians, those influencers can't redefine truth. They can't detract us from the real issues. Demand that Hamas immediately and unconditionally release every last hostage. Anyone who has spent the last 460 plus days demanding anything else should have their arguments chopped down by Chushim's axe. That is one thing we can learn from this week's Parsha. How will you step up this week to bring the world a little closer to perfection? Shabbat Shalom and Am Yisrael Chai.